Hey, paisanos, it's the Super Mario Brothers Super Show!
With the Mario Brothers and plumbing's a game.
I can't figure out if my brain just exploded with joy in hearing that opening theme song, or if I just had a stroke. Definitely one of the two. This is the Super Mario Brothers Super Show. And if you grew up as Nintendo-obsessed as I was, you were probably wildly in love with this one. The show featured an amalgamation of real-world and animated adventures, welcomed major celebrities, and served... Alright, look, let's be real. This was a terrible show, but it was still a lot of fun. How did Nintendo, notoriously a control freak of their brand and image, allow something like this to happen? The origins of the show go back to one of its eventual production companies, DiC Entertainment. Yes, DiC, not Dick. Stop giggling. If you grew up when I did, you absolutely remember this closing screen. DiC was a staple of our childhood. The company produced a ton of beloved 80s and 90s programs, including Dennis the Menace and Inspector Gadget. The CEO of DiC, Andy Hayward, spent a year attempting to convince Nintendo to license the brothers for something that showed Mario and Luigi, but it also went beyond just a simple cartoon. This was not a revolutionary concept, and previous video games, including Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, had already seen their own Saturday morning cartoons. However, despite their pleas, Nintendo was reluctant. After bringing together what Hayward called a, quote, creative team that they were very impressed with, end quote, Nintendo finally consented to the show, but only after DiC agreed to pay Nintendo a royalty, not the other way around, as is standard with cartoons like this. Hayward called the agreement unheard of. The show, produced by DiC and Saban Entertainment, was originally written as a Super Mario Bros. Power Hour. The first idea was relatively similar to what eventually aired, but it was meant to be an hour of animated programming. A companion show was even planned, King Koopa's Kool Cartoons. 4Ks, not 3, thank God. As originally conceived, concept art was produced for more than just Mario and Zelda, with producers also developing art for other popular Nintendo games, including Castlevania, Metroid, Double Dragon, and California games. I would have loved to have seen California games, especially Hacky Sack. Believe it or not, according to the writers who were involved with the show, Nintendo's involvement with the production was surprisingly limited. Nintendo didn't insist on final authority over what could and could not be said. Instead, show writers said that they were provided with a great deal of freedom over how to write the series. Nintendo did provide copies of games and a franchise Bible, giving additional information about relevant characters, but that was about it. The show was not written by people who were gamers, and that led to some challenges and inconsistencies. For example, in one episode, Mario gets fire powers from a star. Dare they make such an obvious mistake? However, this lack of gamer involvement did help advance the plot in at least one way. It allowed for writers to concentrate on the development of story rather than gameplay. This helps explain why you see characters in both the live-action and animated series doing things that were, well, let's just say not something that you would expect to see in the game itself. The biggest draw of the show was Captain Lou Albano, who played Mario. Albano was against it. Luigi is played by Danny Wells, a lesser-known actor whose most famous role was as Charlie in the TV show The Jeffersons. Tall and skinny, Wells also looks like Luigi, sort of. I actually think he looks more like Wario, but whatever. Production of the show had its challenging moments. In a 2013 interview, Wells noted that the schedule was absolutely brutal and very intense, with shooting taking place 6 days a week, followed by voiceover work. In fact, all of the live-action shots were apparently done over a 2-week period, which is insane. From all reports, Albano could not have been a nicer person. However, his lack of acting skills would sometimes come into play. In a story with The Ringer, producer John Grust said, quote, directing him was a nightmare if you didn't accept him as he was. You could waste everybody's time by having him read a line 5 different ways because every version would come out exactly the same. However, Albano's experience had its benefits. His time as wrestler made integrating physical stunts and live performances easy, and Albano was easily able to handle the more physical aspects of the role. Albano was also popular enough to get his own PSAs. For example, he appeared in an anti-drug PSA, where he warned kids,
drugs can and will kill. Remember, don't be afraid to turn to your priest, your rabbi, your minister, your moms, your dads, your teachers, because drugs can kill. And if you do drugs, you go to hell before you die.
Ew, yikes. This was one of many PSAs Albano appeared in. For example, in this one, he warns against playing with guns and knives. Solid advice. In some episodes, Albano and Wells would play other characters. Albano played himself on the show, and the two men played their own relatives. Albano played Mama Mario and Cousin Marianne. Wells played his own sister, Luigina. I cannot believe I just said that name, and I'll also note that this is definitely not something that would fly today, but different story. Yeah. Do these acting resumes not impress you? No? Well, let's be clear, the show was never meant to be high art. It was designed for kids and fan of the Nintendo series. According to Bill White, who ran marketing and advertising for Nintendo, the end goal of the series was to increase awareness of the Mario characters and franchise. It does seem worth noting that the production timeline of the show, it aired in the last 4 months of 1989, were occurring just as Nintendo was truly hitting its stride in the United States. Nearly 11 million systems were sold that year, making the Nintendo Entertainment System far and away the best-selling system in the world that year. The second best-selling system in the world was Game Boy, which sold 2.5 million copies. The revenue Nintendo generated from sales that year was $2.7 billion. Super Mario 3 hadn't even arrived in the United States, but the game was a runaway hit in Japan, where it sold more than 3.8 million copies. Its planned US premiere? February 1990, about 6 months before the Super Mario Bros. Super Show made its debut. In other words, Nintendo had every incentive in the world to promote their brand. Nintendo marketing professionals knew that the best way to ensure the continued expansion of their brand was to do more than just buy commercials and do standard forms of advertising. They associated themselves with some of the biggest brands in America, including Pepsi, McDonald's, even their own breakfast cereal. Nintendo's goal was clear: make themselves the biggest brand in the world. As bad as some portions of the show were, it did have some newer aspects. Its integration of the real world and animated plots were relatively new for the time, and the consistency was enhanced by the fact that the actors from the real world also voiced their animated counterparts. Each episode followed a set format. First, there was the absolutely banging opening theme song. They would then pivot to the real-world portion, which often introduced a celebrity in some surreal way. For example, in the first episode, actress Nicole Eggert, then the star of Charles in Charge, shows up in a medicine cabinet, and the brothers get obsessed with teaching her how to unclog a sink. Next, the animated portion of the show. The brothers, combined with Princess Toadstool and Toad, usually have to fight off some ridiculous Koopa plot. In the first episode, that involves rescuing Toad, who is kidnapped by Birdo, who thinks that Toad is her baby. Other animated episodes would parody famous events in history or literature, including Shakespeare, fairy tales, or famous movies. After a 15-minute cartoon, the show returns to the real world, where it mercifully concludes. There were, in total, 52 animated episodes of this Super Mario Bros. Cartoon. As noted earlier, Mario and Luigi are voiced by their real-world actors, meaning that a little kid watching the show could view the animated series as a continuation of the real-world adventures. The cartoon voices are awesome, by the way. For example, Toad, who is voiced by John Stocker, 100% sounds like he was picked up off the streets of Brooklyn.
Mommy, you're not my mommy!
The animated series did feature regular bad guys from the game, including Koopa Troopers, Triclide, Lakitu, and more. Keep in mind that if the writing seems terrible, there's good reason for that. It often wasn't written at all. The lines between Wells and Albano were often improvised, which I guess explains a little. The show was filmed in front of a live studio audience. Like most sitcoms at the time, it also featured a laugh track. Now, you may remember that it wasn't just the Mario brothers. Zelda appears prominently in the show, and while there aren't as many Zelda cartoons as there are Super Mario ones, there were enough for some basic plot beats to be established. The rough plot of the show, and I use the term plot loosely, is that Link lives in Hyrule Castle with Zelda and her dad, King Harkonnen, where he has been hired to guard the Triforce of Wisdom from Ganon's efforts to steal it. Ganon already has a Triforce of Power, and the Triforce of Courage is, eaten? Also, the Triforce's talk? Fine. As noted in a Destructoid piece about the show, the 14-minute runtime didn't leave much room for creativity. Each show roughly followed the, quote, simple formula. Brief fight, Ganon's plan is attempted, nearly works, doesn't work, do the Mario. Furthermore, like the Mario Brothers show itself, writers had to be fast, pumping out 2 scripts a week to meet deadlines. This was slightly reduced from the animated Mario series, which had to be written at a rate of 4 per week. Now, as any fan of the Zelda series knows, Link never has any voice dialogue in the games, meaning that the show represents one of the few times you actually get to hear Link's voice. The decision not to give Link a voice has always been intentional, with Zelda producer Eli Anuma saying, quote, "Since people have played Zelda over the years, they have their ideas of how Link might sound. If we were to put a voice in there that might not match up with someone else's image, there would be backlash to that. So we've tried to avoid that." Yeah, given how Link sounds in the show, I think Enuma may have been onto something. Let's be honest, whereas the Super Mario Bros. Show could be written off as a different take on the Mario Brothers themselves, the Zelda show was bad. You undoubtedly want to kill Link, who is a whiny little bit twerp and is just deeply unlikable. In one episode, he spies on Zelda in her nightgown, whistles, and screams, "Looking good, princess," especially from this angle. He also will not stop whining for kisses from Zelda, who, unsurprisingly, is not down. Destructoid refers to him as Hyrule's favorite incel. More accurate words have never been spoken. Now, to be clear, that wasn't the intent. Jonathan Potts, who voiced Link, said that, quote, "I pictured Link as being a teenager who was like the ultimate teenage boy, who was like a puppy. If you can imagine what a puppy would be like, running around, peeing on the carpet, and overacting, everything was dramatic. Zelda is fine, sometimes damsel in distress, sometimes likable and self-sufficient, but you also have this character named Sprite, a fairy who has a crush on Link. She even offers to help bathe him at one point. Creepy." On the plus side, the show does use a huge swath of animated enemies from the original, including Octoroks, Moblins, Dodongos, and more. Other weapons and items like the flute are also mentioned, and these items are even used properly sometimes. Furthermore, when enemies are dispatched, they leave behind goodies, just like in the game. The dynamic between Link and Zelda, in addition to being deeply creepy, was inspired by the relationship between Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd in Moonlighting. Because, that's something that an 8-year-old in 1989 would have understood. Only 13 of these episodes, all tied exclusively to the live-action show, would air. These aired on Fridays, while the Mario cartoons would air Monday through Thursday. It would be wrong of me to miss what is undoubtedly the best-known line from every Zelda cartoon.
Well, excuse me, princess. Excuse me, princess. Hey! Excuse me, princess.
Not for nothing, but this god-awful catchphrase was intentionally included in every episode. The decision was made by Bob Forward, one of the screenwriters on the show, who said that Robbie London, a VP of Creative Affairs for DiC, forced its inclusion in the show. In response, Forward decided to include it in literally every episode. Forward's wife, Eve, also a writer on the show, has said that the limited series Bible they received required the use of that phrase in every episode. However it got there, it was terrible. That limited series Bible also said that there should be no physical violence, hence the zapping sword instead of actual sword fighting. It also noted that monsters never died, but only respawned at Ganon's. Because of this lack of guidance, Forward said that they had freedom to do what they wanted to on the show. That explains many of the decisions, like Ganon teleporting or Link linking. In other words, you can't blame the writers for this. Nintendo never put their foot down, and the writers just kind of did what they wanted. This approach also explains some of the outside influences on show episodes. For example, in the 7th episode, Doppelganger, Zelda gets a magic mirror that creates an evil twin. The episode was based on a cursed mirror from a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Other members of the Forward family, including Bob's sister and mother, also pitched ideas that found their way into the cartoon. Finally, the Super Mario Bros. Super Show aired with 2 songs that would positively brainworm their way into your head, and if you haven't heard them during this dialogue, it's a miracle. First, there was the infamous opening number, the Mario Bros. Rap. Unfortunately, whoever actually performs this song has been lost to time, but its legend lives on, as a Mario Bros. Commercial for the Super Mario Bros. Movie would essentially serve as a remix of the song.
Trouble, you could call us on the double. We're faster than the others, you'll be hooked on the brothers.
The closing theme, Do the Mario, was actually performed by Lou Albano himself. In a portion of the program reminiscent of the Muppet Babies cartoon, God, I love that show, a song would be covered. Examples usually included contemporary hits like Bad or Thriller, although the show would sometimes drift into the hits of the 50s. Great Balls of Fire and Secret Agent Mans are 2 such examples. Despite the relatively short time that the show was on the air, it's worth noting that there were a lot of episodes, 65 in total. Furthermore, the show was able to obtain the services of a pretty extensive list of guest stars and celebrities, including Magic Johnson, Danica McKellar, Vanna White, wrestler Rowdy Rod Piper, and Albano's old friend, Cyndi Lauper. The show's ratings were surprisingly good, at least at first, with the first episode becoming the highest-ranked syndicated series at the time. It would compete against other kids' shows, including the Muppet Babies and Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. Critics, even at the time, didn't love the show. Reviews tended to pan it because of its lack of sophistication, even for its target audience. Everything about it, from the slapstick to the costumes to the acting, was over the top. Critics also focused on the lack of creativity and humor. For example, a September 1989 review written by Mike Hughes of USA Today found that the show lacked the, quote, wit and spark, end quote, that you would expect out of a children's program. In a more modern review, Common Sense Media notes that the show's Italian stereotypes, which include Mario screaming "Hey Paisanos" at the beginning of the show, aren't great. 1980s, folks. More valid criticism comes from places like Den of Geek, which noted that the show was more a cartoon with Mario in it rather than a Mario cartoon. The show's emphasis on borrowing plots from other literature or movies, despite the fact that they had no shortage of characters or plots to use, helped to drive home the idea that this program was never really meant to be about Mario and his friends, but just feature Mario in some sort of wacky adventure. Despite the lack of critical acclaim, the show performed well in syndication. There are multiple potential reasons behind its ultimate cancellation. Wells said it was done because Nintendo had had enough, telling Slam Wrestling in an interview, quote, The show didn't last because the show didn't mean anything to Nintendo. After the first run, Nintendo said pull the plug. They didn't care if we were number one. It didn't mean anything because we were chump change to them. Others say that DiC had the chance to make more money with different cartoons. Either way, after 65 episodes, the plug was pulled on the Super Mario Bros. Super Show, allowing DiC and Nintendo to move into different Nintendo creative properties. First, there was Club Mario, a short-lived effort to repackage the animated portion of the series and remove the live-action versions. In this show, which aired from 1990 to 91 in syndication, a new group of characters was brought on to replace Albano and Wells. The plot, such as it was, featured these characters hijacking the signal of the TV show and replacing it with their own adventures and commentary. The show was led by two Mario-obsessed teenagers, including Tommy Treehugger and co-MC. Stunningly, the show did not last. Multiple cartoons would also air. For example, there was The Adventures of Super Mario Bros. 3, which is roughly based on the aforementioned game. Albano and Wells did not return to voice their characters, but John Stalker and Harvey Atkin, who voiced Toad and King Koopa, did. 13 episodes of this show aired on NBC. Then there was the Super Mario World cartoon series, which aired in 1991, again on NBC, and was based on the new Super Mario World game. Another 13 versions of this show would eventually air. Super Mario World and the Super Mario Bros. Super Show would be edited into a new show, 1994's Mario All-Stars. This content was basically a repackaging of already existent content that was released to match the release of the Super Nintendo game Super Mario All-Stars. The Adventures of Super Mario Bros. 3 and the Zelda cartoon would be removed from this version of the broadcast. A lesser-known Nintendo show was King Koopa's Kool Cartoons. This nightmare-inducing spin-off aired for 2 months on KTTV Los Angeles as part of a Fox Kids show. Everyone involved in this probably tries not to think about it. Episodes of the Super Show would air in syndication until 1994. Starting as early as 1989, episodes would be available in various home media formats. Today, you can order DVDs of the program for as little as $7. You can also watch episodes on YouTube or Amazon. The cartoon's success eventually influenced the infamous movie. In fact, Nintendo originally sold DiC Entertainment the rights to make an animated film out of the television show, but that never came to fruition. Instead, you got the infamous Super Mario Bros. Movie, which came out in 1993 and starred Bob Haskins, John Leguizamo, and Dennis Hopper. The movie, of course, was atrocious. It was a massive critical and commercial failure. However, like the cartoon before it, it developed a bit of a cult following. Phil Harnage, a writer on the Super Mario Bros. Cartoon, said that staff was relieved that the movie was such a flop, and noted that no one from the movie contacted the staff of the show. The movie was such a disaster, and it strayed so wildly from the source material, that it impacted Nintendo's future licensing strategy. Of course, it's easy to rip on the show now, but let's be honest, that's like saying Barney doesn't have enough material for teenagers. The show was geared towards a very youthful audience and represented a first attempt for Nintendo's efforts to make a break into other forms of media. It was corny, it was cheesy, the tone often missed, even for a younger audience. But it was different. It was exciting. It brought in some real sports and acting stars and made little kids feel like, yes, Mario was a part of their world. And, in a sense, maybe it was even a little bit magical. As always, I love hearing from you folks in the comments. Any special memories of the Super Mario Bros. Super Show that you want to share? If you do, please leave them below and let us know what you remember about this beloved program. Yeah, beloved. I said it. I may also do more videos on future Mario-based media, including on movies like The Wizard, a 1989 movie from Universal starring Fred Savage and Luke Edwards that was basically a 90-minute advertisement from Nintendo for a runaway child and a dead twin. It 1000% traumatized me as a kid. If you enjoyed this video and want more, I'd love to hear from you. Please like or subscribe and click on the next video that the almighty YouTube algorithm has selected for you. As always, have a wonderful day out there, friends. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I liked making it. Take care, everybody.